Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a bit of a different meeting this time. This is part two of something we've done in person a couple of months ago in the 7-Eleven headquarters or the Innovation Lab. So this is going to be the part two of that. I'm going to go through that very quickly, but if you actually want to catch part one that was done by Leighton Lucky, you can catch on our video capture in YouTube. You can watch the part one, so to speak. So welcome to the Service Design Network Dallas chapter. As always, we are being sponsored by Slalom and Precocity. They've been allowing us to provide you this content for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years now. So once again, thank you to our Slalom and Precocity sponsors for helping us bring the knowledge of service design to the entire world. Very quick recap. I am Greg Lacloufie, and I'm Director of Design Strategy for Slalom. Brandon is also with us from Precocity, and I believe Robin is out today, and Brenda is here as well. So this is the core team of Service Design Dallas. If you, to go back to Brandon's point earlier, if you have missed any of the past 50 or so sessions we've had the past 4 years, definitely go to our YouTube channel and watch anything you want. We have anything from Mark Stickdorn talking about journey map all the way to, everybody, you can look at that if you want to, but we cover a wide range of topics for service design. And of course, if you want to see them specifically like Andy Pauline talking about advanced service design, and of course the wonderful Adam Lawrence talking about facilitation, definitely take a peek at what we have in our library, so to speak, and find the content you need for your service design knowledge improvement. As Brandon was mentioning earlier, if you want to ask a question to Preston, just make it clear to us. We're going to kind of like aggregate those questions while he's speaking. He has quite a bit of content to go through, so we don't want to interrupt him. So when he's done doing his thing, we can definitely get those questions to him immediately after he's done and do like a kind of a organized Q&A, if you will. You can talk to each other. Definitely, you guys are always very engaged with each other. Do that. But if it's one specific question, make it easy for myself and Brandon to find those so we can hit Preston with that. So again, today is part two of the AI-powered service design series, if you will. Today is going to be more like, I don't want to say it's an advanced part of it, but last time we had Leighton talk about the very basic, what can AI help you do for service design? And he did some very wonderful, very, very playful way to show you that you can actually do a lot of service design tasks and methodology through very basic chat GPT / Claude / Gemini. But today we're going to get a bit more thorough and more sophisticated about that. We're going to show you, or Preston is going to show you how you can actually create your very own AI assistant, your very own service design LLM, and no longer having to go through ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever you've been doing right now, and literally build yourself your own AI assistant, name it the way you want, having to remember who you are, what you do, what you're more into, and have that person be your AI assistant for all your service design needs. So without further, I know he has a lot of content to go through, so please welcome Preston. Preston, my colleague, is the Director of Emerging Technologies for Tonic 3 here in Dallas. And Preston, do you want to quickly introduce yourself before you start going into the presentation?
Yeah, well, I do have a little bit of introductions inside of my presentation as well, but
I stop sharing.
so why don't we just dive right into it and then I'll get through it that way. All right. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Thank you for all coming today. I really love it when people come to these because I hope they walk away with at least one thing they can take back and do right away. So as mentioned, as Greg mentioned, this is really kind of part two, but I'm going to build upon that a little bit more on some of the other presentation and focus more on building an agent and kind of walk you through some of these pieces of the puzzle. First and foremost, my name is Preston McCauley. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I have about 25 plus years of experience in the UX field, working with AI development and product management. I'm the director currently of DX Labs, where I work a lot with augmented and virtual reality and focusing on neuroscience techniques. In addition to this, I've been working and sharing a lot of items on LinkedIn about how to use AI in practical use cases, how to work with cross-functional teams, how to build workflows, how to model out these AI systems, testing them, generative AI approaches. And I share a lot of this on my GitHub. which if you just look on LinkedIn, you're going to find that information. I share it every day. Design connected systems. I've worked with all the tools that are out there in the ecosystem, and there's a lot. Azure Studio, Google, local GPT, private GPT, Pandas AI. And in addition to that, if that's not enough, I also am the co-founder of the Dallas AR VR group, and I love to play video games when I'm not doing AI coding or something like that. So thank you again for having me. Let's dive in. So I always like to start the stage a little bit with essential AI terminology. I'm going to use some of these terms as I'm talking, so it's kind of crucial to have that background in your mind. Then we're going to look at some of the tools in the ecosystem, generative chat services, things that you can use on your computer, providing you have the right capabilities, how to use some of these LLM tools, and then we're going to start to get into building your own GPT agents specifically. I'm going to actually do a live demo of that. And I have a few other items along the way that I don't want to spoil the surprise. Now, I always like to say a little bit about kind of what's going on in the ecosystem. And I think if I look back, there was a TikTok video a while ago about Singapore Congress that was really saying AI is here. We can't hide from it. These changes, no economy, no country, right? We need to educate. This is part of that education. I like to reach out to people and show them, like, don't be afraid of these tools. Whatever your field might be, however you're engaging them, you want to make sure that you're using them in ways that are going to benefit you and benefit the people that you're working with. So while I'm going to be showing you some stuff that you might get a little bit scared about, understand that I still use these as tools very much in that practice. And the tools are only as good as the person that's really going to be using them. And so that is a big element that's important when you're working with these types of AI systems is garbage in, garbage out. That still holds very true. Now, if any of you have read any of my work out there, one of the things I talk about is kind of building out this approach to learning with large language models. So when I first started doing this, I actually designed an AI companion myself through learning AI. And I taught myself how to do AI through AI that I built with AI. It's very meta, I know that. And there's a whole article out there that I wrote on that. But what I learned across the process was how to build AI systems, how to build large language models, how to train them, how to fine tune them, how to embed data structures. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of those items coming up here. All right, so let's dig into some terminology. When I talk about AI, of course, I'm referring to artificial intelligence, but when people talk about it in today's space, they're really talking a lot about generative AI, okay? An agent overall is typically an AI system that's going to be directed at a single purpose. It may or may not have a front-end capability. In fact, there is some level of programming with a lot of these things I'm going to show you today. I'll tell you where that programming comes into play. But I'm also trying to keep this as no-code friendly as possible because there is a learning curve on the code side. A co-pilot is really considered to be an agent, but think of it as it's working side by side with you when you're working on a task. So if you're trying to complete something, maybe you've heard of GitHub Copilot that's kind of on the sidebar and you're working on your code and it's helping to revise your functions, or maybe you're composing an essay and it's helping you to come up with some other ideas or subtopics. The problem with copilots across the industry is that everybody decided to name their products copilots, and that is so confusing. So if you run across that term, know that it's really confusing in the market space, and really what they're referring to is a very specific AI that's meant to work alongside you. Generative AI is a term that you hear all the time in this space. It really is about text, images, and music and being generated from these large trained data sets. These trained data sets produce what are called large language models, and there's a variety of them, okay? They really understand, generate, and interpret human language. We are not to general artificial intelligence yet. So what these are basically doing are looking at repetitive patterns and understanding items that they've seen before. It's not necessarily thinking for itself. So it's one thing I kind of wanted to set the stage there for understanding. One of the ways that we use large language models is through a process called retrieval augmented generation, or as you'll see this, it's called RAG. Now, RAG is one of those approaches that applies new knowledge to a language model. So you may have a generic model, like for instance, a GPT model or Meta's Llama 3 model, and they're very good at generalized tasks and approaches. They're really good at understanding basic questions. But if you start to go into something that is a very fine-tuned level of expertise, whether it be in the medical field or a particular type of disease, etc. This is when you start to do two things. One is you either have a large language model that's trained to be an expert in that particular field, or you add in what's called the RAG technique or retrieval augmented model, which creates a database and a data store that has the different types of topics that you're going to expose the large language model to. Think of it this way. When you have a combination of books on the shelf that are experts on the medical encyclopedia, for example, and a doctor has limited knowledge within their own known knowledge set, they're going to go to this book and they're going to look at that and go, here's the cures for XYZ, here's the new drugs for 2024 and beyond. That's essentially what this RAG process allows it to do, is it exposes that data, that's new data sets now, to the large language model. And it can use its interpretation and capabilities to be able to make new inferences about that. That's especially true and very powerful when you're building your own agents, because that inference on new data allows us to see things in different ways. So when you're sending that data over, it's really going to be it's going to be a token. When you see this across the ecosystem, you're going to see that you're usually charged by token. And a token, in the easiest terms, is really words, characters, or spaces. Spaces count as well towards that. And most of the models now are evolving where you don't have to worry so much about the token context, but early on, we could only send a certain amount of text. Now we're getting up to 1 million context tokens, which means I can send half of my database or half of the medical encyclopedia in one go to the AI and have it understand that. And that's a big drastic change that's happened maybe only in the last 6 months. Now, in the RAG process, there's a vector, okay? It's a numerical representation in three-dimensional space. I'm not going to get super mathematical here, but I do want to have a little bit of understanding of it. When you take and you embed this data through the RAG process, you're doing two things. You're storing the data in a vector, which is the three-dimensional space. And in addition to that, you're storing the process of the data itself inside of a data store. So let's break that down just a little bit easier, right? I like this simple example. So if you think about a chunk of data, in this case, I have a red fish in a room, a blue fish in a room, and a creepy orange fish outside the room, right? So near points of data in a three-dimensional space are going to be close to each other. And in this visual representation, a red fish is in the room with a blue fish. The text is very similar, near similarity. And then if you have the fish outside, there's a creepy orange fish outside the room. That's a little bit further away from that. It's important to know that because that's how the LLM is going to look at the data as mathematical representations in these vectors and spaces. So just think of red fish, blue fish, creepy fish outside the room, and you should be good to go. So when I first was approached to work on this presentation, one of the things I really wanted to focus on was understanding just what are the latest and greatest things going on in the service design space. So I actually built a pretty complex AI system to go out and analyze websites, search engines, Reddit posts, social posts, you name it. Whatever is out there in the public domain, I wanted my AI to go out there and analyze it. And it went out there and it figured out essentially what were some of the reoccurring topics that were appearing. Now, there's certainly going to be bias because you're looking at topics that are out there across the internet space, and you're never going to be so sure if those are Correct. So that's why there's always needs to be a human component in the mix that's looking at the data and understanding, yes, this actually is true. The AI is not hallucinating. This is what should be out there. And when I went out there, there are three key areas that really did pop up. And I've done this search so many times now across these AIs and multiple ones. I'm really big about trying to confirm the validity and citations of the data. That learning intelligence and personalization came up a lot. So when I'm building out my AI agents, one of the things that I wanted to do is I'm creating an agent that's a specialist in service design techniques and methodology. In fact, Brandon Ward, I grabbed a few of his notable quotes on service design and added it into the model I'll show you later on. But it may or may not show up depending on the context of the question because it's dynamic, right? So when I build these systems out and I'm looking at all this data that's coming back, there's a lot of garbage in there too. So it's so important to clean the data source that you have. It's kind of the first thing I tell people is you need to make sure that your data source is clean. I left my data source dirty here on purpose, and I created this methodology. It's another GitHub that I have out there that's called Chroma Viewmaster. It's an open source project that I put out there because I couldn't find anything to help me understand what is the total compromisation, what is the total data inside of my data source, and what are the primary topics that are coming back from the embeddings. So I used an LLM to generate this tag cloud structure. And then I did this on my dirty database as well, so that I could see what problems might exist. And you can clearly see I'm coming back with null and object, etc. Service design is still very prominent, but there's a lot of noise in the data. Now, there's some fancy 3D knowledge graphs and things like that that I could use as well. But I did want to have really a quick, practical approach. And this is what this is, because I can look very quickly between the data that I'm looking to analyze from a service approach and also look at the data source that the LLM is going to pull from. And by understanding these two elements together, I can feel confident that at least my LLM is having a conversation with a room of potential experts, okay? And this is the potentiality of this particular type of topic to appear when having a discussion. So now that we have that, we have a clean data source, I wanted to take a look at some practice, take a look at some actual tools. And I'm going to give you a little bit of some demo here of some of these tools as well. These are ones that you can use. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because ever since I originally put this together, there's been so many more tools in the last like 2 months alone that the space is constantly changing day over day. In fact, if you look right now, there's new models out there already, GPT-4, O, 3.5 Claude Sonnet, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and they're always competing with each other to say, I'm better against this benchmark versus I'm better to do for this type of task, right? So on one side, you have these generative AI agents, Claude, Cody, Dolly, etc. They're generative systems that allow you to do a variety of different tasks. Some are what's called multimodal, which allow you to actually generate image and text at the same time. Those have actually evolved quite a ways in the last 2 to 3 months. So they're getting much better at understanding both text and imagery at the same time. The ones that we'll focus on here are really going to be local tools. And I was originally going to give this presentation in purpose, so I have some QR codes on here. If you have your mobile phone, you can hit these and make track of them for later on so that you have them. The three that I like to share here, and I'm going to go into depth in 2 of them just because of time, is LM Studio, GPT-4All, and Olama. So LM Studio is a tool that you can download depending on if you have a CPU or a GPU. You can download this tool and use it and be able to access a variety of large language models that are out there. I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen share over here just a second so you can see this. All right, so if you're looking here at my screen, you can see that I have, this is LM Studio. LM Studio allows you to look at using a model locally. And what does that mean? If you have a sophisticated system, and when I say sophisticated, I mean an M1, Mac, M2, M3, etc., you need to have some pretty significant GPU power to be able to run these local systems. On the PC side, you're looking at probably a 4000 series graphics card to be able to run some of these. Now, they will run on CPU, but they're going to run slow because the GPU, the graphic processing unit, is going to be used to do most of the processing. But once you have these, one of the models that most people are using right now locally is Llama 3B. You can simply come in here, download the model. This is very similar to how you might use ChatGPT, except you're using it locally. After you have the model in, you can just start a new chat. You can choose which model you want to load. And from that, you can basically go in there and start asking questions of it. Now, a few things that are a little bit different in the interface that I want to point out here is the system prompt. Now, later on in some upcoming courses that I'll be working on, I'll be talking a lot about prompt engineering structures and approaches and techniques. What I want you to understand from here is that the system prompt is really about those base instructions that the AI has. It's one way that you can take the AI and change its whole persona to be something else. And it's as simple as me coming in here and saying, you are an expert pirate. And I can choose one of my models. I'm going to use Gemma 2. And this model is loading into memory, okay? Well, this model is loading into memory. One of the things that you have to think about is specifically what are the capabilities of the model. Most people using local LLMs are going to be using 7 billion parameter models. That means that they were trained on a ton, 7 billion parameters of data, roughly, to be able to create that language model that can be used. Higher level of parameters typically mean better inference, better understanding, better context, and things like that. What's important here is I'm using a very low level model, and I'm just going to change this prompt to say, you are a pirate, talk like a pirate. Now, while that runs, you can already see that it took on that persona, right? This is a big power. If you think back to the presentation that Lucky gave a while ago, was trying to understand, the Gutenberg press and thinking about what are the service design implications to paper mills. So I could easily change my persona to be some of those people that exist during that time. And later on here, I'm going to show you even further down that pipeline of how I use these agent systems. But with a few tweaks here, I can change this prompt to be a lot of different things and fine-tune my approach. All right. There are a lot more details I can go into around prompt engineering, and I will over time. But to understand this at the basic level is you're providing a system instruction, and that's how you want the AI to act and or respond, the LLM, excuse me, the generative system. So I could continue my conversation here with my pirate friend, but I'm not going to. I'm actually going to jump over to another system here. This is GPT-4All. Now, much like the other system, LM Studio, GPT-4All allows you to chat with a local model. In this case, I'm using Mistral Instruct, but I'm going to show you something even cooler here. Let's say you have some research that you're looking over and you're trying to understand some potential insights. Maybe it's a whole bunch of interview series. In my case, I've been doing a lot of work with neuroscience, and so I built an LLM that actually is trained on neurotechniques, neuro approaches, neurophysiology, etc. Part of that understanding was because I wanted to use a subset of neurological research to understand new ways to approach peers or the latest in research techniques, all of these things. So inside of GPT-4All, which once again runs locally, so I don't have to send my data to GPT, I keep it all on my local system. I can add a database. That is literally not as complex as it sounds, because what you're doing is you're just choosing a folder of PDFs, text files, CSV files, transcripts, PowerPoint presentations, XLS files, you name it, right? Any of those things, right? So in my case, I wanted to grab some of the latest research journals on neurophysiology, and I created a database. It takes a little bit of time to index some of this, but keep in mind, I actually ran this ahead of time so the index was quicker. And just by doing this, I didn't do any programming. I just simply added this, downloaded the tool. It walks you through it, GPT-4All.
Hey, Preston,
Yes,
you need to be sharing your screen because you're not.
it's not sharing. I guess it didn't share.
I see the green Mistral. I don't.
You see this?
Mm,
I'm not. I just see you.
I it was working. I can see the.
You know what? We'll share, we'll reshare, and we'll see if it might have froze.
Sounds like Tatiana is seeing it, so maybe okay.
Can you see it now?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Well, hey, no worries. You can all see the GPT-4All?
Yeah, the green with the
Yep.
brown.
Fantastic. No worries.
Okay.
I'm used to this. Oh, it's all good. So inside of here, I now have loaded this database, and this could be anything you want. This could be your research. This could be, you know, it could be potentially documents that outline the service design approach you're taking, methodologies, whatever. What are some of the new research techniques in the brain? Right. Very dumb question I'm asking. It's going to run. Now, it's looking at all of the data that I embedded, if you go back to that thought process, and it's trying to say, hey, here's what I found looking at that. Now, in my data source here, I think I have somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 10 to 15 gigabytes of data. It's quite a bit. And so it will take a little bit to run this because it's running locally on my system. It's not going to be as fast as the GPT model or ChatGPT or any of those. But I'm already starting to get some responses here. And I know the Mistral model fairly well, the base LLM, that's what I call this up here. And Mistral is not very good at, doesn't have a lot of knowledge on neurophysiology, brain techniques, brain methodology, research, etc. So I can clearly see that this is actually coming out of my data source, right? Now, I can also say, hey, can you show me some cited sources on neurophysiology treatments? All right, so here now I've focused the model, and this is one of the techniques and another term called grounding. What I'm trying to do is ground the LLM so that's looking at the attached data source. And that really helps so that we can understand that we are looking at, if you go back to that tag cloud I created earlier, data within the system. As I mentioned, this is one technique you can use yourself, and I'm going to let that run for a minute. But let's jump back over here. All right. You should all be seeing my slide deck now. So one of the challenges of jumping between multiple monitors, but just make sure that's showing up. So in addition, now what I showed you just a moment ago with GPT-4All and LM Studio is those are tools that allow you and enable you to run locally language models. You're not sending it off to a server. It's all staying within your own environment. All right? That's a really big thing for a lot of people. And so I spent a ton of time trying to research what are the best approaches to do this. What are the tools that can do this? How can I ensure that the data is staying within my local system, not sending out for any types of calls or APIs, anything like that? Now, if we push the envelope a little bit further, we start to get to looking at some agent-based tools. Now, when I say agent-based tools, they're really teams that can communicate. All right. So if you think about what I showed you here was a single LLM acting as kind of a single agent. But now I want to start to think about, and this is where we're going to see the industry change drastically over the last months. We're going to see that much more in the future, is agents that can auto-correct and auto-adjust and auto-adapt to the person and the user that's working with them, right? So what this means is we have AutoGen Studio is one of those tools that's out there. It can allow you to create agents. It has a front end for it. Crew AI is one that I've been using a lot. I'm always in the Discord channel chatting with people. In fact, the earlier document that I showed you, where was my base data source, I built a series of agents, and I'm going to show you a lot more about that in a minute, to go out and research service design. I am never going to know all of the tangents that could be in the field of service design, nor am I going to know all of the latest techniques or approaches. And so this can be one way that I don't have to go out to Google and search, but I can have the data come to me. Makes it a lot easier and saves a lot of time. And then AutoGPT is a very similar tool, and it works with AutoGen Studio. But for Crew AI and AutoGPT, there's not really a front-end interface as easy as some of the ones I showed you, or at least as sort of as easy. But there are people that are building them in the ecosystem that allow you to build agents and stuff on top of those. So we're going to leave a moment here. We're going to leave the complexity. We're going to leave the easiness, and we're going to look a little bit deeper at the use case and how I was building out my service design team. So I wanted to create something that everybody can use, because I believe that in order for people to understand technology the best, it has to apply to them. And they really have to understand, how can I walk away from this talk and use it themselves? How can I put it into practice? We, as UX designers and service designers, we need to understand how all these different interconnected pieces work together. And so now you should have a good understanding of kind of the pieces of the puzzle to use these tools. And that's where Lexi came about. So you can hit this with your QR code. You don't have to do it necessarily right now. Or you could also go to the link up there above. But Lexi was my approach to design an AI agent that was grounded on a number of service design techniques, methodologies, approaches. And I also wanted to add in a little bit of data that would help to align it towards understanding artificial intelligence, both how to apply AI to methods of service design, as well as applying AI to business problems in service design. And this is actually going to be using a GPT-4 agent for this first demonstration. And I'm going to walk you through this a little bit, because I want you to kind of see the logic and thought process that goes into this, but I'm also going to show you some of the stuff behind the scenes so that you can see how to create this yourself. So I'm going to switch screens again. Hopefully, we're going to get this screen up here. All right. So this is Lexi, but this is really the backside of Lexi's programming. This is a GPT agent. Now, GPT agents are pretty much available for everybody now to use, not necessarily to create. But I will show you that when you create one of these agents, you can specify those system instructions that I said. And that's really what's driving the core purpose here. So I designed a methodology of prompt engineering to construct chat systems that I called a CDP, personality definition profile. I basically design a personality that the AI can use, and then I design it in a flow-based structure so that we can have really good conversations. And if you look here, and hopefully you can see this, I'm going to try and zoom in here as much as possible. Lexi, you're an AI expert in service design. You are designed to assist users in integrating AI into the service design approach using no-code solutions, right? I thought it was important because with the technology that we have, it's very quick to jump to code, but I wanted to make sure that we focused on some core aspects that could be done using AI systems without you having to code something new. Your primary goal and objective is to provide clear, valuable assistance through a friendly and approachable conversation style. Here, I'm basically setting how I want the personality. This is the pirate example that I showed you a moment ago. And warm conversation. Pay close attention to the approach the user tries to understand and to learn. You should dynamically adapt your responses to the user's expertise level as the conversation continues. That is a key thing that I built into this because I wanted to make sure is if you were a beginner just trying to understand service design or an advanced user trying to understand how to use complex AI within a client approach, understanding blueprinting, any other aspects within understanding services, that Lexi could adapt the conversation to that. So there's more within here, but in addition, this is the REG approach that I talked about earlier, service design knowledge, reports on service design experts. And so all of that data that I combines some stuff that I put in here. So if there's bias in here, the bias was generated by myself because I was the curator of some of the core data within here. And I put this data into the system so that it could look at it much like that medical encyclopedia book on the shelf and say, hey, I don't have knowledge on that. Let me look back at my repository of information to see if I can help answer the user's question. Let's give it a try. So I come up with a few different questions back here to see how Lexi is responding. And testing in these types of systems is really important. I'm going to shift it back a little bit to service design. Let's start with a basic question. What is service design? Now, I programmed it to specifically have a greeting and how to help you and things like that, and I can adjust that, right? So, very brief, basic answer. Let's pretend that we're going to get a little bit more detailed here, and let's start out diving in and say, hey, what are some of the techniques that service designers can use? Now, if you remember, I tried to, with that one line of code, I made it so that Lexi could adapt to the conversation as the user is adapting, transforming their questions, and getting more complex with what they're trying to ask. I also have specific structures in place to provide enough detail on these different areas. So I can start to dig in deeper to this, right? So let's take a look at personas a little bit, okay? Or actually, let's take a look at, well, I'm going to do a lot about personas today, but let's take a look at personas. Tell me more about this. All right, so we can continue to build upon this. Now I'm going to go to an expert level question, right? I have a business client that owns a restaurant and they are having trouble with clients coming in and ordering. Okay. So I'm now setting a new stage for scenario. Scenario modeling, situational hypothesizing. I do this a lot in these tools. In fact, working on this presentation, I actually use Lexi to help think about some ideas and some ways that I wanted to approach this. So notice here, we're actually staying close to the personas because that was the last question. So That's not quite what I wanted. I want to actually adjust this more. So let's go ahead and change the sentence structure. And let's go ahead and say that, what about my restaurant problem? Okay, now we're starting to get a little bit here, a little bit of insight. Great. That's much better. Now, it's going to keep going on the personas because it's really stuck on the personas. It wants to generate personas for me now, and it's really trying to do so. No more about personas, please. How can I figure out how to use AI in determining the problem and pain points between connected touch points in my restaurant problem? So I'm going to continue to build upon this. Now, I wanted you to see structurally because a lot of people ask me, like, how do you use these things in the most effective manner? It's just like I said before, is you are still providing a lot of that knowledge, a lot of your baseline strategy to think about how you phrase and answer that question or ask that question in certain ways. So as I'm building upon that layer upon layer, I'm collecting a lot of knowledge, a lot of reading, a lot of data to understand how I might approach this problem. If I get more and more specific, I'll start to get better responses as I'm driving into this now. So that's great. Showed me a lot of data. What are some service design tools that could help me capture this process and touch points at each area? So it's going to give me a list of tools. Now, I may be like, well, that's great. Hey, what do experts say about service design? Can you refer to your data source, please? It's going to keep talking for a little bit there. But I always I tend to start with a generalization and then I drive deeper when I'm working on questions like understanding touch points. What I'm looking for is what are the things that I'm missing? What am I not seeing? Because I'm only human in this equation. Now it's going to refer directly back to the data source. This is that grounding moment I mentioned before. And it's going to list some people that it probably found from my data source. I can look back in the data source and see if there's anything in here, what they're saying about this. Human-centered design, we're going to keep going. Cool. Well, I'm going to be a little biased for a moment. Didn't Brandon Ward say something? Maybe he did. I don't know. Let's see. Hey, Brandon Ward's an Northern expert in service design. Look at that. So it's bringing Brandon back into the discussion here, but that's because in the data source, Brandon is a part of that piece. All right, we're going to switch back gears again here. Now let's jump into something even crazier. So far I've shown you how to build your own agent. You can go out there and do that. You can put your own data source. You can either use the GPT side, excuse me, or you can use the local system and run it locally yourself and ground on your own data. But what if I wanted to push that envelope further? What does the future hold for some of this? So of course I took Lexi and I upgraded it, excuse me, a lot more. So let's take a little look at this video here quickly. First, I'm grounding my data. I'm going to create a database. I'm going to go ahead and set my data source. This is a local application that I built rather quickly. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to read and embed all of the data that I showed you. It's a similar technique that we used before, but something else.
Can you say hello, Lexi, and tell people what your main topics are about in the data source? Hello, I'm excited to help with your questions. My main topics revolve around leveraging data science techniques to improve healthcare service design. This includes exploring innovative approaches to patient care, streamlining clinical workflows, and enhancing overall healthcare experiences. What would you like to know more about?
What can you tell me about service design?
Co-design methods are essential in service design, allowing for a collaborative approach between designers and users to create services that meet their needs. Feedback and iteration are crucial aspects of this process, enabling the refinement of designs based on user input. By incorporating feedback and iterating on the design, you can ensure that the final product is not only functional but also meets the user's expectations and needs.
If you look at your data source, what primary topics have the most detail?
Data-driven approaches, service design, and personalized recommendations are some of the primary topics that have a high level of detail. These areas are particularly well represented in reputable sources such as MIT.
All right, well, and just like that, I've upgraded Lexi to be a little bit more sophisticated, where I'm using a couple of different tools. This is much more complicated because I'm using Python, some front-end applications that I built out. I'm grounding on the data sources still. In addition to that, I'm also building out a model using a technique called open voice to create a voice synthesization and allow Lexi to basically have a voice and speak the response. I talk to a lot of my AIs because I find it a little bit more natural when I'm having deep hypothetical conversations. That tends to be how I use them the most and is the easiest for me to use those. All right, but that's not it, because Lexi has friends, lots of friends, right? So let's go back to the service design problem at hand and understanding. If we go back to the previous presentation that was done, we're looking at the paper mill and understanding specifically what are some of the challenges that are happening across service design channels for working in the paper mill. So I started out by building a collection of agents, all right? This agent collection have different activities, different roles, and different tasks that they take on. Through these tasks, they're trying to learn as much information as they can about the problem, the pain points, the personas, and the context of the questions. So this is actually using Crew AI, and I built a number of agents. This is actually a different tool called PyViz that I love because it does a really great job with knowledge graphs, and I can explore multidimensional data in a number of ways. And this allows me to see kind of how are my agents, questions, and answers and data working together, all right? So if we think here, we have these different types of agents that are the stars indicated on here. What are they doing? Well, you have to think about this as a team construct now, okay? So I wanted to build a service design team that was not just a single agent, but had all of the roles potentially you would encounter. So designers, researchers, historical analysts, creators, content creators, you name it. All of this can be done. Now, there is still the bias in there. I still want to make sure that humans can review this process. So don't freak out about that. But understand, I'm using this as a very highly advanced tool to kind of push our capabilities forward so we can produce even better solutions because we understand more about the problem that we're approaching. So if you think of like a foreman on a construction site, there's a lot of different questions and a lot of different specialities that people have when they're building a building, right? That's the same thing that's happening here. I've given each agent a particular type of persona, backstory, and objective, and it's designed to figure out what's going on. So let me explain this a little bit because this is a lot of data. So when I was asked to make this presentation, I wanted to take the earlier stuff from part one and build it to the nth degree. So I created the entire service design team that you saw before as AI agents. I'll pause here for a minute. And these agents are going out and understanding first two things. What is service design? What does it mean? Because I wanted to make sure that the agents had a good understanding of the service design field. Two, the problem at hand, in this case, what are some of the concerns with the paper mill during Gutenberg's printing time and adjacent areas. So we're going out, the agents are going out, they're researching both websites and historical documentations. Now, I'm not programming questions. What's happening is the data is coming back and the analyst is sitting over there and it's going, hey, this may be important. Let's bring this up to the other agent. Hey, this may be important. Let's bring this up to the other agent, right? And they're having this conversation between each other and going, hey, that's not correct. That's not important. Let's put that on the side for now. One of the things you can see here is this agent's like, hey, let's take a look at science, religion related to the impact of Gutenberg printing in the religion in Europe. So it discovered somewhere along the lines, looking at all the articles, content, data out there, that somewhere out there, religion seemed to be popping up a lot. So I think we need to investigate this area. Now, I would always take this information, and that's why I put such very detailed debug logs, so I can look at it, understand how it's being generated, because we don't want this to be a black box. We want to have transparency and citations. And I'm really big about making sure that we try to cite any data that's coming back so that we understand, is it truthful, is it valid? All right, so as we're continuing through, it's going to run for a little bit here. I'm going to stop a few places along the way. You can see here that it's gathered information about the paper mill industry during the Renaissance. And it's also starting to come back that it says it feels it has a little bit of an understanding and innovations. It's like, let's take a look at some of the innovations. Now it says it's gathering enough information. I want to understand the resources, the languages, the audience, and the time period. So if you remember back to my agents, I created an agent that was a historical analyst. Its purpose is to understand that time period. But you can even push this further, where that agent can then become the new persona that exists during that agent. So you can actually run this back as a simulated scenario with real data from each of the agents. I'm going to continue down the chain. They're still researching, looking at tons of this. In total, I think I have like 72 pages of documents that's being generated in the background. Obviously a lot, so I created a couple different executive level reports to look at this. So let's see. Now this agent's like, hey, I think I've identified primary personas. So it's saying, let's go ahead and look at a paper mill worker, a merchant, and a scribe. These are people that seem to be important during this time period based upon all of the research. And then finally, I'm going to continue a little bit more. And this is a structure called JSON, but essentially I'm trying to format this so I can use it in other ways. So if I had this persona created, for example here, and I wanted to put this into my documents, or I wanted to, build a touch point map, or I wanted to build a service design backstage front, whatever I wanted to do, I could continue to revise my agents for a particular goal. In this case, my persona agent can generate an entire prompt that I can then send to DALL-E, or I can send to a local image generating and generate an entire persona based upon historical understanding, situational understanding, clothing of the time period, and the list can go on from there. And that's what this is telling me about, right? So I'm still reviewing this, I'm still looking at it, and then here is kind of the final understanding of these things. We're trying to get to a final summation. This ran for about 2 to 3 hours, I would probably say I had this running. And then at the end of it, I get a very nice report that I had a program. And this is kind of what comes out of that is I have a new data source as well that I can use if you look over here to do this. So a lot of stuff went into that. I know there's tons of questions coming back, and I've got a few more things I want to cover.
Just
because I
FYI,
think it's
Preston,
important
it
for
is
everybody to understand how to be able to use this themselves. Let's take a real quick look at this. If you're looking to
Preston.
use any of these tools, I kind of took my own learning curve and then sliced it in half because I'm not the user, I'm not you. So I kind of added a little bit of a cut down on how much time it would take to learn if you didn't have some of that background knowledge. But I also took into consideration that when I was learning these tools and how to use them, I tend to make notes as I'm learning things, so I have a pretty good understanding of how I can teach it and how I can share this information with other people. So looking to use one of these tools, learn it, like whether it be GPT for all or Llama, and use it effectively in your day-to-day, probably about a month is a good time frame to set aside using practical examples and pushing the envelope of really what you're trying to ask and understand. Now, I tried to do a comparative analysis of ease of use, richness, performance, community support, and customization. Community support is really important in these tools because they are on the cutting edge, a lot of them, and so there are bugs that pop up, so you have to kind of be ready to deal with that challenge. But and of course, since they're always evolving, you're going to be looking at new tools all the time. It's important to understand kind of where we are in the ecosystem. So overall, the best chat tool back when I did this about 2 months ago was Claude. Then GPT 4.0 came out, and that really did an amazing job with basic chat, inference, understanding. And you'll see all these LLMs like to drop benchmark numbers. The benchmarks tell you one thing, but a lot of LLMs tend to work towards coding towards those benchmarks now, so they don't really tell us as much. So I try to get as much hands-on, active everyday use as much as possible so I can really say, oh, this is actually performing at this level. So Claude, the new Sonnet 3.5 just came out 2 days ago, 3 days ago. It's really probably the head tool right now that I would use for anything programmatic. And then on the other side of the equation, GPT 4.0 is still doing really good with longer context documents. Claude likes to withhold conversation. It won't give you a lot of information, whereas GPT 4.0 and 4 and 3.5 will give you a ton of information. So those tools are really good. As far as the local tools, LM Studio is a little bit tricky to use. It takes a little bit to get used to. But then GPT for all just doesn't have the best interface as you saw it earlier, but it's still very powerful. Hugging Face is more of a complex website tool. It allows you to see the latest models, allows you to see spaces and set up LLMs to run on the website there. So there is a lot of potentiality there, and there's a ton of community support. So there are various subsets of this whole field around data science, and I'll go into a lot more of those topics in other presentations, but just to kind of give you an idea of some places to kind of get started.
This is really cool, Preston. We're at the top of the hour. We're at 5 after. Are you kind of nearing the end? We've got a few questions we wanted to hit.
We're literally here.
Really?
Sweet. Yes.
So, Brandon,
we're literally there. Awesome.
Yeah, perfect timing.
Well, let's see. The first one I've got was from Maria. Maria asked, if you work for a business that has strict AI policies to protect data, would these on-premise, you had just shown your local one, the GPT for all, and the on-prem CPU, GPU driven stuff, would these be safer to use since you download it onto your machine, or is this data used to train AI models that can potentially cause leaks?
So as far as I know, using these local systems, they're self-contained, meaning I could shut off my internet completely. I'm not using any internet callbacks for these. So when I'm using like LM Studio, if you really are concerned and you download the program, because you still have to download the program, there is that inherent risk, right? But once it's offline, you're offline. You know, no one's doing magical beaming to your computer unless they're hacking in on your local network, right? So safe is always a matter of context, right? So you have to think about what is the data that you're using and what are the concerns with it. I look at it this way is most companies, most businesses have already pushed their envelope where they're using data on the cloud in AWS and other things like that. It's really not much different than that. But there's been so much words, so many talks out there about like, hey, safety and data, and they're going to use your training data. It's more perception than reality.
One of the things that I mentioned was that even if the content that you provided to it didn't get beamed out into the ether, the content that it was trained on and that it could beam to you, that could be copyrighted private material that it was trained on, so that you could still get into hot water, even though you were air gapped, essentially. And that also answered Duncan's question. So thank you for a double whammy. Ed asks, what tools were used for the Lexi 2.0, the one you did with the voice?
Yeah, okay. So Python is a big foundational element of most language models. It's kind of the language you have to learn. So Python was used. Another tool called Streamlit, which basically is kind of a front end for Python that allows you to build out really rapid prototype applications, although you could go to market with them, but it does allow you to prototype on top of that Python code. And then I also use something called Open Voice, which is now in version 2, which allows you to, it's basically an LLM that trains a voice model. So it was not Scarlett Johansson. It was a voice model that was trained on Lexi. And I could modify that in a number of ways and spend a couple hours to create my own custom monster voice or whatever else I wanted to do with it. I could do that. And then the last piece of that is Olama, which has an API locally, and that allows me to pass all of my conversations through that model and run it locally. I'm one of the few people that loves to use local models this much. If you look across the Discord ecosystem, everyone's like, just go talk to this guy, because I've figured out the ins and outs of them all. So I keep everything local as much as possible.
So that answers Ed's follow-up question, which is Lexi 2.0 all local?
All local.
Nice.
Running off of my Mac M1 Pro.
Fantastic. To that end, would you recommend, like, would a gaming rig, like a Windows-based gaming rig, be a really good candidate for a machine for the local-based stuff?
Yeah, I would go to a much higher video card as much as you can possibly go to, because CUDA, which is the primary way that you run LLMs locally, is really complex to get up and running on the PC. I'll tell you, it's taken me 20, 30, 40 hours sometimes to get it set up and working right. And it's much easier with these tools that I showed you, LM Studio, to run them. But yes, a more powerful rig is definitely going to make a big difference, but primarily the graphics card, not so much on the CPU. So, but an M1, M2, M3 on the Mac side, they seem to work better than any NVIDIA cards. And this is someone that's been using them daily, and I upgraded my video card, and it's not comparatively.
We got one last question, and then I want to get to something Jesse was bringing up. So,
Sure.
Shatan, apologies if I mispronounce your name, said, thank you, Preston. Wanted to know what would be some of the business cases we could use this for.
Oh, well, I think there's really that can run the gambit. I probably use AI 50 times a day. So for me, one of them might be looking at understanding a subset of an interview and analyzing it for sentiment, right? How was the user thinking? And that might not be just a single document. It might be 50 documents, because then I can look at all of those things and go, what is the primary sentiment across this? I can look at it and goes, what particular pain points do people have? I can look at it and understand competitive analysis. What type of business is doing some feature better than another feature? It's a matter of you putting your thought process together and trying to go, what is it that I'm trying to understand? Which, with a UX background and UX design, if you have that knowledge at your disposal, that's kind of how we're trained to think. So it works really well with these tools to advance that level of thought process.
Nice. So Jesse says, it's more of a comment, but I think it's worth mentioning and discussing. He says, I have some fundamental concerns about applying AI in all of the ways demonstrated here. Technologically, very impressive, but handing over some of the critical, hands-on work of a service designer, like synthesizing data, removes our ability to reach our own insights through exposure to what we've researched.
True.
It's an important discussion that needs to take place in our community. So what's your response?
Yeah, and I started off when I started this presentation saying that I'm all about citation, understanding the truth in the data. In fact, I actually have a patent on understanding LLM truth structures, specifically because I'm very much aligned with what your concerns are, right? If anybody can train anything, then truth is just doesn't matter, right? And so it doesn't make sense. So we want to make sure that we're both logical, valid, and truthful when you're looking at these types of things. So from the synthesis standpoint, what I do is I typically will do my own analysis first, right? Which is still going to have my own inherent biases. But I'll look at that material and I'll be like, here's what my executive report summary is, right? Then I'll go use AI 3 or 4 times to see, are we aligned? Where are the differences? Are there something is there something that was missed that I missed? Or was there something that could be done better or another area I need to investigate, right? So I'm first doing the human level evaluation or having someone on my team or having someone else do that, and then doing these other techniques, right? Not necessarily vice versa. After I've done it a few, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and I've kind of fine-tuned the process and the methodology, then I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But that's true with using any tool, right? Whether we're using Figma, Miro, or whatever it is, right? Once you build that familiarity, you start to think less about the tools underneath it and how you can expedite and build upon your processes.
Thanks, man.
Hope that helps, Jesse.
Yeah,
that was a good question because I'm very.
I don't think. I mean, Jesse brings up a really good point, right? If we offload all the critical thinking that a service designer is supposed to be doing, bringing all of their context and whatnot to these models, then we could paint ourselves into a corner, and it's a really scary place to think that somebody could think I can do everything just by boop boop boop.
It's a scary proposition, but understand how much programming it took me to build out my team structure, right? So it's not just without thought. Everything was thought through the process and the connective tissue. So it is scary, and we have to acknowledge some of those things as well.
Adam, hey Adam, known Adam a long time. He asks a series of questions. So I'm just going to give them to all at once, and they're kind of technical questions. So, have you tried Lexi against well-known use case studies for service design and judged its recommendations? Like, have you benchmarked it yourself? And then have you looked at any local Apple tools for retraining the LLM, like Create ML? And have you tried any recent local LLMs like Llama 3 or Sonnet? So we're going to bundle those and throw them.
All right, let's see if I can get them all together. No, not directly any research case studies directly, but I know that it does have those in its database if they were existing in the websites. The agent that's on GPT is far more capable because it's a more capable model, and I can ask it to go out and actually do web research right then and there. So I could build upon the Lexi that I showed you in GPT that you can go out and use, and I could start to do that level of detailed analysis. That's something. Local, I can do that as well, but it takes a little bit more programming for me to adjust some things to connect it to the web in that way. The next question was around models, right?
Yeah, the Apple tools like LLM,
Yes.
Create ML.
So I've used Create ML in the past for doing image generation and a couple other things, but Apple is a little bit behind, as we all know from the latest Apple thing, where they're basically partnering with GPT to supplement Siri's capabilities. That being said, Apple products run LLMs better. Plain and simple. I don't know. Yeah, the silicon, it's so much better, so much more efficient, faster. I run a model which is called Mixtral 7XB. It's a mixture of experts. So what's great about a mixture of experts model is think of it as built into the LLM itself. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different LLMs that are all trying to decide what the right answer is. And then there's one that says, I'm going to take all of these things and go, this is the right answer, right? And that's a very complex model to run, and it runs really well on my M1 Pro, which is surprising. And for the last piece was the models. I've tried GPT-4o, Claude Sonnet, all of them, actively using them for complex programming, complex thought processes. I'm impressed every time a model comes out, but there's this period of time for like 2 weeks after a model comes out where it's like, why is it speaking French to me? Like for real, it changed my language to French, and I was like, what happened? So there's bugs and stuff that pop up all the time.
And I think this is our last question from Aaron. Instead of upgrading your machine, could you use a VM to run the models for mass compute?
Sorry, say that again.
Instead of upgrading your machine, could you use a virtual machine to run the models on? So you can
Yes.
leverage mass compute.
Yeah, on my YouTube channel, I actually put out some videos specifically, and I have a couple other ones coming out to show you how to fine-tune a model specifically from start to end. And I use GPU, I use Google Colab to actually do that. And that's a service you can pay for. It's about $9 a month, and it gives me access to those supercomputers. So A100s and things like that, 50 GPUs in a cycle. So something that might take me on my local system 2 days to fine-tune, which is highly probable. I've done it. I've watched it. I've babysat it. I can do in about 3 to 4 hours on one of those higher level GPUs. There's other tools out there like RunPod that you can use as well, that are a little bit cheaper. And Hugging Face also has that capability too, which I shared before.
Excellent. I've played with Hugging Face myself. I built not a model, didn't go into any of the depth that you did, but I built a specific
Face, right?
to help me do some very specific things, and it's fascinating. And this is really helpful, and you helped me dig deep. And I'm definitely going to touch base with you further about helping with some side projects I'm working on.
Yeah.
So that's it for the questions.
Yeah. So, Preston, thank you so much for your time. No, you did not disappoint. We knew this was going to be the advanced part 2. Not saying that Leighton was easy by any means, but definitely this is the next level. A lot of comments on the chat saying that they're going to have to watch this again and again and again, which was expected. So we're going to try the very best we can. And Brandon, I don't put pressure on you, but to get this on YouTube next couple of days so you can watch it again and really understand what Preston was telling us, and definitely the step-by-step process you can replicate it into your own and build your own AI assistant, I guess, based on the legacy that you were very kind to build for us, to be honest with you. Really appreciate that. And then we will probably see you again sometime in the future, which I'm sure this technology is evolving on a daily basis. So whatever is true today probably will be vastly changed in 6 months from now, but
Probably in 2 months. Yeah, things tend to change in a couple month period of time. It's really that fast. But yeah, I'd love to see if anybody on LinkedIn that's listening here has used some of these tools. I'd love to hear about it too on LinkedIn. Like reach out and share your experience because
yeah, we definitely put the recording on YouTube probably the next couple of days. And of course, in the comments, we can definitely tell people to go and watch your YouTube channel as well for more hyper technical details. Obviously, this is very high level. So designers are very much like human-centered designers. So some of the stuff you talk about was like way over our head. But this is the world we live in now. We have to kind of like use technology, and this is a new tool we have, just like we used to have post-its, a few years ago. Now we have this thing that we have to understand and use for our own benefit.
Balsamic 35 plus. So we're moving on.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Preston. I'm glad you finally were able to join us, and we missed you last time, but we finally caught up with you. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us from all over the world. As usual, we try to bring you the best content for service design, and we'll see what we can bring you next. Thank you, Preston.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.